The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Para X, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
Good evening and welcome to Illuminating the Paranormal, opening your mind to the possibility. How is everyone this evening? I hope all of you are well. It is again cold here in the Midwest and the sun is out, but it's just to trick you because it's actually really cold out there. Got a nice cold wind. We're hoping for some 50-degree weather next week. So in the meantime, we have to settle for the 40s and the 28s at night and pray for no more snow. I know I talked about us having snow last Tuesday. Well, the Wednesday, the very next day, we didn't have just snow. We had 4 inches that laid on the ground. But luckily, the day after, it was 55 and it all disappeared. So, whew, that was good. And no more snow, Mother Nature. Please, for the love of God, take your medicine. So tonight I have with me an unbelievable guest. This is somebody I have known for quite a few years. We've seen each other at quite a few different conferences, especially the Chicago Ghost Conference. But this person had been living a normal life as an attorney until he was about 40 years old, and then his world got turned upside down when he discovered a dark and long hidden family secret that he was related to a serial killer. It turns out that he is actually the great-great-grandson of Herman Webster Mudgett, better known as H.H. Holmes. Jeff Mudget is the author of the book Bloodstains. He is also the co-host of the show American Ripper on the History Channel. Jeff has as well had appearances on Haunted History, Ghost Adventures, TED Talk, and the guest of many different radio shows. So please help me welcome the great-great-grandson of perhaps the most evil American ever, the American Ripper, or some of you know him as H.H. Holmes, with his murder castle in Chicago, Illinois. Please help me welcome Mr. Jeff Mudget. Jeff, how are you this evening?
Hey, Tina Marie, thanks for having me on. I'm excited. I've been looking forward to being on your show, and like you said, we haven't seen each other in quite a few years, and hopefully we'll get to do that. We'll get to do that again this summer at the Michigan Paracon.
We'll see. It seems like all the paranormal conferences seem to be up in the air right now, really praying and hoping everything settles down and we can all get back to somewhat normal. So, yes. You, sir, have had quite an unbelievable life. I mean, the things that you have done, the things you have gone through, the research you have pulled together, just unbelievable.
Well, thank you very much. I sometimes look at it as lucky, and sometimes I look at it as a curse, to tell you the truth. Like you said on your introduction, I was leading a normal life in the Bay Area, California, when my father left me the books that his father had achieved from during his lifetime from his grandfather, H.H. Holmes. And what I had considered just some legend and lore turned into a 20-year-long investigation into what's real and what's false. And to tell you the truth, Tina Marie, I still haven't come up with all the answers.
You and me both. Wow, so many different things that happened. I mean, the things that he has done. Now, if some of you are unfamiliar with who H.H. Holmes is and the story of his murder castle, some of you may be familiar with the American Horror Stories 5th season named Hotel. There was the hotel and the character loosely based on H.H. Holmes. So this gentleman just confessed up to 27 murders, but then later on he says he may have killed as many as 200. That had to be a huge shock coming to you, huh, Jeff?
No, we still haven't, Tina Marie, history, despite the efforts of thousands, if not tens of thousands of researchers, still hasn't come up with the number of murders that my great-great-grandfather is responsible for. That interview you mentioned while he was in prison awaiting execution has largely been agreed as just another one of his fun stories.
Okay.
With very few, as a matter of fact, quite a few of the ones he admitted to killing were found to be alive. Mm-hmm. So as that's pretty much how our research has gone regarding this dapper, elegant little educated man who went to the University of Michigan and obtained his degree in medicine. His stories were often false. His lying was pathological, to the extent that many times we've all kind of shaken our heads and just decided we don't know whether he was lying to himself or to the rest of the world.
Right.
But what we have found is that the coincidences never stop, and the story grows larger and larger the more we dig into it.
Wow. Now, I have taken the little tour that Ursula Bielski, if you've ever been to Chicago or if you ever go, she does a great tour of H.H. Holmes and takes you to the cement factory that he owned, where supposedly he chopped up some of his victims and put them in cement and threw them into the river. She also shows you where his hotel or home had been in Chicago, where the post office now is. So it's a great tour. If you guys ever get to Chicago, take Ursula Bielski's H.H. Holmes tour. It's a good one. But I remember one of the things they did mention was, and you were saying about, you don't know whether or not he was lying to himself or lying to other people, but he was involved in over 50 lawsuits he had against him for all the different little devious things that he was doing and saying. I was like, what? Unbelievable. So, yeah, he's a con artist. That's what he was.
Oh, extraordinaire. Maybe I hate to use the word greatest, but it's the word that pops into my head, maybe the greatest of all time. And, he made a living identifying a couple, Tina Marie. Mm-hmm. He would seduce the wife. He was, his ability to manipulate and control innocent human beings was perhaps unheard of. But he'd identify the wife. He would seduce her into falling in love with him. The husband would soon disappear or die, and lo and behold, the life insurance policy would have named Holmes as the beneficiary. Yeah, and he made quite a living doing just that all around the country.
Crazy. Now, we do have a question already in the chat room, and this is from my lovely niece, Kelly. She wants to know, are you still looking into the relationship with your grandfather and Jack the Ripper?
Oh, yeah. As a matter of fact, I wrote a post today on it on my Facebook page, Bloodstains, the Facebook page, how all of a sudden after American Ripper, which History Channel and I worked on, you see very little these days. There's no new movies, there's no new books, there's no new events, there's no new documentaries about Jack the Ripper. And I tend to think that has to do with the world realizing some of the issues that we raised on the show with my co-host Amaryllis, about how the story and how the facts haven't worked out over these 132 years since London and the Jack the Ripper killings, and I believe there is some connection to the issues we raised on the show, and I'd like to have someone else help me dig a little deeper into that, because I think we've proven without a doubt that there was never a Jack the Ripper serial killer. That there was a man who wrote the Dear Boss letter and signed it Jack the Ripper. That author, Jack the Ripper, then murdered Catherine Eddowes, and he described the murder in the letter Dear Boss. But the other murders, the Whitechapel murders, have very little connection to that murder or to that letter. And I'll tell you an interesting story. While we were in production in London for American Ripper, we were in a London hotel at the bar, and the production team was off in the corner. It was right after the presidential election, and they were talking about life in New York after President Trump. And so I was at the bar enjoying a drink after working all day filming. And two gentlemen walked up to me in suits and asked if they could ask me a few questions. And I said, sure. And I asked them to introduce themselves, and they showed me their badges, and they were from Scotland Yard.
Oh.
And they went, yeah. And unfortunately, none of this was filmed. The crew was watching me talking with them, but they never picked up on how significant it was.
Right.
And and they were asking me questions about my theory, how Jack the Ripper had been an American who had written the Dear Boss letter and then killed Catherine Eddowes. And lo and behold, they said they disagreed with me about it being an American doctor, but they agreed with me that there had never been 5 killings, that there had been a copycat involved. And so I think there's more to that Jack the Ripper story than has been unearthed so far.
Yeah. Well, in regards to that, I actually have another question from our friend Tabby in the chat room, and she says, please ask Jeff for me, reading into some of Holmes's statements about what he did, saw about the Ripper murders so detailed. Do you think Holmes was either a spectator or a participant in the killings instead of being the actual Ripper himself?
It's an excellent question, Tabby, and my ace investigator, Warren Kroom, whose birthday it is today, and I'd like to take the time to wish him a happy birthday, if you don't mind, Tina Marie.
Happy birthday.
He's the guy that helps me track down every fact that comes up about H.H. Holmes, and he's an incredible investigator, and I don't know what I'd do without him. So we were talking about that today, and we actually think when the story is finally laid out facts, we're going to find that perhaps Holmes wasn't ever the serial killer to such a degree that history has maybe laid him out to be. There was never 200 murders. I don't know if there was ever 27 murders. There was 10 to 15 probably. But I think Tabby has hit on something, Tina Marie, which is really true. He was probably the boss of a crime syndicate in America that operated in a number of cities in America. When you go back, you see that Holmes was in Fort Worth, Texas. He was in Kentucky. He was in Indianapolis. He was in New York. He was in Boston. He was in Toronto. He was in Denver. Now we're finding out he was in the Bay Area in California. In all these places, there were Holmes-like crimes being committed, and there were people working with him. And any of them that became associated with him, Tina Marie, they went from being innocent human beings to felons, or dead. And so we were talking about that. There's probably more of a syndicate to the story than has been talked about yet.
So is that what people are calling the Holmes curse?
No, you know what? The Holmes curse, and I'm glad you brought that up, is that people are reluctant to get into the Holmes curse. What happened there, Tina Marie, and it was written about in The Devil in the White City by Eric Larson. After his alleged execution, which at this very moment we're trying to prove never happened, there were anyone involved with his arrest, his incarceration, the trial, his prison sentence, and then the alleged execution, either died or went missing or suffered a terrible misfortune. And for a long time, that was called the Holmes curse, that some spirit or ghost had gone back to vent his anger upon them later in their lives.
Wow.
Well, we think that he escaped the execution. We think that he was never buried at Holy Cross Cemetery in Philadelphia. And we think he went back himself and visited these people that angered him during his trial and the other events. And we're trying to prove that right now. We're trying to get financial help to see if we can further that investigation with my team of investigators, and then one day maybe put it out as a documentary on TV again.
Nice. That would be kind of cool. That would be something to see. Just all the different stuff that he got into and did. And so many of these buildings, I'm trying to remember some of the stuff that I had learned when I had taken the tour in Chicago. But were there a lot of buildings that he just kind of sort of swindled people out of?
You know, I don't know so much about that. If you watched Haunted History, you saw that they actually filmed me. The post office gave us permission to go down into the basement. I'll tell your listeners, the Holmes Castle, the murder castle, is now a United States post office, which purchased the property, the building and the property in 1937, tore the old castle down, and then built a post office pretty much to the side of where the castle had
Right.
a little bit. And when I first visited with Ursula, as a matter of fact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This was 15 years ago now, almost. The post office allowed. I told them who I was. I told them that we were working on a documentary, and that my best friend was with me, Kim Estes, who was a Hollywood actor, and they allowed us to go down into the basement, which had been abandoned by the post office because the employees thought it was haunted. Nobody went down there. And we were surprised to see what a mess it was down there. So I wrote about it in Bloodstains. Mm-hmm. And I told the producers at Haunted History about it, and they achieved another set of permissions for us to go back down into the basement of the post office, but this time with a film crew with me. So if you ever get the chance, they repeat it pretty repeatedly. And if you watch for Haunted History, the Holmes Castle, you'll get to watch me walking through the basement of the post office and actually seeing some of the original tunnels that are still there that Holmes had built from brick, that the post office hadn't destroyed when they built the post office over the top.
Now, did you go there during the filming of The American Ripper?
Yes, but the post office refused History Channel their consent to film in the basement. They wouldn't let us enter with cameras again.
Because I remember, and when I watched that, if you guys ever get the chance, Xfinity has it, The American Ripper. It's got 8 episodes, fantastic. You guys got to watch it. That you saying reminded me in that one episode where it showed that the house or the castle was not actually on top of where the post office was, but like you said, a little off to the side, but on that property.
Oh yeah, if you go back down there now to Chicago, any of your listeners, if you go to 63rd and Wallace in Inglewood, there's the post office, and then off to the side there's a little almost like a park with 2 trees over the top. Mm-hmm. And you can get out of your car, and you can walk right where the murder castle was.
Right.
And one day, Tina Marie, it's my hope that the post office, the federal government, will give us permission, maybe with DePaul University or the University of Chicago, to go excavate the grounds to see what's left.
That would be so cool. That would be awesome. That would be a good show to watch. That would be really nice. And by the way, guys, if you do go, there is like a grocery store across the street that you can park there, or you can park at the post office, one of the two. So you can get out and walk there. Yes. some people did that night. I did not. I kind of stayed in because I am psychic medium, so I just sitting on the bus, I could feel like it didn't feel good. It reminded me of the same type of feeling that I got when I was in California, and you're was it Pier 49, where you can see across to the prison down there in San Francisco? Oh yeah. That feeling, that awful feeling. Well, you get the same one when you are right in front of the post office. So you get the same type of feeling. So I have no doubt that he did some killing there. That it's for better words, blood so brown.
Tina Marie, people, the shows I go on, quite a few people want to argue about how many innocent victims there were in Holmes's life, and I really don't know how many he killed or murdered. I don't think I've ever met anyone who denies that murder happened there at 63rd and Wallace. So right. I understand your feelings when you were there. I understand. As a matter of fact, I'm not a psychic medium, but I had strange energy feelings myself down in that basement, which I'd never had before in my life.
I believe it. And you even said that a lot of the post office people don't seem to make it a point to go down there very much. So, yeah, creep factor. This goes right up your spine. So I have another question for you. I saw somebody had posted on Facebook. They wanted to know about the Three Rippers theory. Can you tell me about that?
One more time, I didn't catch your question.
That's okay. On Facebook, I had seen when we were talking about my show, Up and Coming, someone had posted the question as to whether or not you'll be addressing tonight the Three Rippers theory. What is that?
I don't know. To tell you the truth, okay. I don't know.
Okay. Someone had posted that, and I'm like, Three Rippers theory? I've never heard of that. So apparently there's a theory out there that it wasn't just one person, that it was actually three different people, which is something you did start to address. But I'm like, okay, is that leading towards the Three Rippers theory? But crazy.
He might be Tina Marie, he might be addressing the fact that it's my theory that the author of Dear Boss, who I believe was H.H. Holmes, murdered Catherine Eddowes. The two murders a month before, the Nichols and Chapman murders, he had nothing to do with other than reading about them in the newspapers and then mentioning them in the letter. The murder afterwards, the Mary Kelly murder, had no similarities whatsoever to the other murders. And I think history has pretty much just binded them together because of the convenience involved in how gruesome and gory they all were. But as far as a police investigation actually tying evidence, of them together that would stand up in a court of law, forget it. There's nothing there. Yeah,
exactly. I know that when I was watching the show, The American Ripper, you guys had used like a facial recognition expert to try and help prove that the box you had that you believe belonged to H.H. Holmes, that actually had pictures in it of some of the people who were believed to be killed by Jack the Ripper. Now, I help me remember, were you guys able to confirm that the pictures in there were actual pictures of some of the murder victims from Jack the Ripper, yet it was H.H. Holmes' box of pictures?
I think you're talking about the artifacts that we came across at the museum in Indianapolis.
Okay.
At the museum there, and the curator had some amazing collection of H.H. Holmes materials. In fact, even knives that were said to belong to Holmes that were made in London. And those were the first times I'd ever seen those. And I recall the two pictures you're talking about. They were unusual, they were eerie, but as far as being finite enough to identify a living person in 1888, I had my doubts, to tell you the truth.
Okay. All right. All right. We do have another question in our chat room from Tabby. Has any more efforts been made to find out if anything is in the water at the warehouse that Holmes owned?
Well, if you remember the show, Tina Marie, we had some amazing sections about Amaryllis and I out on the river outside of Chicago. And we actually had some naval engineers with radar and sonar equipment that were looking down into the river bottom to find some of the concrete coffin-like boxes that Ursula was telling you about.
Mm-hmm.
And we actually came up with some detections, some electronic detections, which caught the entire crew's eye, and History Channel's as well. And they were on the verge of spending a lot more money to dig those boxes up out of the Chicago River. But then the lawyers started running into what it was going to take, how we would have had permission from the city, from the state, from the federal government. The EPA would have had to have approved it. It was amazing. Even Canada was going to have to okay it. And so we all kind of accepted the fact that probably wasn't going to make the next episode. We only had one left at that time, maybe two.
Right.
But I was back there signing books one day, and the mayor's chief of staff came up, and he was saying, "Hey, I'm a big fan of yours. I love your book." And we were all watching your show in the mayor's office, and Rob Emanuel, and he said, "We were so disappointed when you guys didn't come asking us for permission to dig up the river." And my jaw dropped, because I was under the impression that we had asked and they had said no. And when you heard this chief of staff, there was no way they wanted that river dug up.
Yeah. Well, after it's exciting and there's a show on the air, then everybody's like, "Oh, yeah, let's jump on board." So, and I know that the river there, if you guys have ever been to Chicago, it's not like the water's really clear, so it's really kind of hard to see things in the water to begin with, and then to dig, can imagine. Yeah, like Tabby says, red tape, always red tape. Oh yeah.
And then we were there in the wintertime, Tina Marie. Mm-hmm. And there were like icebergs floating down the river. It was cold.
Oh, jeez.
It was cold.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've been to Chicago in the wintertime. Oh my gosh, the air, the wind that comes off the river. Whoa. That's when you wear two scarves, not just one. So, that gets pretty chilly down there. So, you know what? We're going to take a little bit of an early break, because I see some more questions popping up in the chat room, but we're so close to commercial time. We are just going to go ahead and take our commercial break now, guys. So I wanted to let you know you are listening to Illuminating the Paranormal on Para X with our guest, Jeff Mudgett, the great-great-grandson of H.H. Holmes. We'll be right back.
Your source for everything paranormal, Para X.
Hey, this is Lee.
And this is Michelle.
And this is Dustin from the Dead Zone.
Your source for everything paranormal, Para X.
found it at last. Marla's sacred cauldron. This is the legendary artifact that has been whispered about in hushed tones for hundreds of years, and now it's mine! All mine!
Who dares defile the sanctity of my castle walls? Step away from the cauldron, you impertinent, muddy-metaled maltworm.
Never! I've spent half my lifetime trying to discover your age-old secret of stirring the cauldron.
Oh, for Merlin's sake, that's no deep, dark secret. Just tune into the Para-X Radio Network Thursday nights at 9 o'clock Eastern for more cauldron stirring than you can shake a wand at.
Oh, well, in that case, I guess I don't need to take up any more of your time, so I guess I'll be going.
Not just yet. We've got a little unfinished business to take care of.
That's Stirring the Cauldron with Marla Brooks every Thursday night at 9 p.m. Eastern on the Para-X Radio Network.
Welcome back, everyone, to Illuminating the Paranormal. My name is Tina Marie, and our guest tonight is Jeff Mudget. Jeff, welcome back. Thank you so much for being here. I have some more questions for you. Let's see. Oh, Kelly has another question. Have you found any new evidence to tie your grandfather to Jack the Ripper?
No, the only evidence we have tying him to Jack the Ripper was the study I did at the University of Buffalo when we compared his handwriting by computer with the handwriting on the Dear Boss letter. You know, we came back 97% similarity. And then we had some passenger lists on him using aliases going over to Southampton and then back to New York during the time. But as far as, any direct evidence tying him to Whitechapel, at the specific time in 1888, no, we don't.
Okay. All right. Because I know there were Jack the Ripper style killings in New York and Chicago after the Ripper deaths stopped in Whitechapel. And wasn't it then that you were hoping to be able to prove that it might have been your great-great-grandfather?
That was a part of the show. Amaryllis, my co-host, the ex-CIA operative, she and Ray Johnson went up to research some murders that had occurred at the side of the lake north of the city. And I intentionally stayed away from those because I didn't want to taint any findings they had because of who I was and because of my past theories.
Okay.
And Amaryllis and Ray came back with some pretty good evidence about murders that had been considered suicides by the law enforcement. And when they researched the archives, they were slit throats and abdomens, similar to the Ripper murders in London.
Okay. All right. But they still have nobody that they've been able to pin those on either.
No, not at all.
Okay. All right. So when, I think towards the end of your show, The American Ripper, that you had done, you finally are given permission to actually go and exhume H.H. Holmes' gravesite. And he had 2 gravesites that he had purchased. Why was that? Did you ever figure that out?
We still haven't figured that out, other than he wanted shoulder room, I guess, and when we still believed it was him in the grave. And but we still don't know what that was about. And I don't know if you recall, Tina Marie, this is still one of the most fascinating aspects of my entire decade-long investigation, was what we found digging those graves up with History Channel. And I got to tell you, the History Channel people and the Magilla production crew was incredible. An exhumation, we all thought, we go with some guys with shovels, we dig it up, we see what's there, and we film it, and off we go. No. This was a major archaeological project. I
saw that. Wow.
That we had to get lawyers. My family had to sign off on everything. We had to shore up the graves because the land wasn't holding. And then we had grave sites, neighboring grave sites that all of a sudden raised issues with the judge who had to sign off on everything. And the history put a lot of money into the exhumation. So my hat has always been off to them for their graciousness in allowing the project to continue. Because when we started Tina Marie, we all sat down and we thought it was going to cost us about $100,000 to exhume H.H. Holmes.
Right.
Well, it ended up costing over $1 million.
Woo! Oh my! Well, and they had people there with special walls to help hold it up, so you didn't disturb the graves beside it. You had the backhoe there. You had people, an actual archaeologist there with like brushes and a little tiny spade. It was like, wow, they're really taking this uber serious. I was surprised.
Well, and you know what? I'd explained to history that, listen, I had my theories about whether Holmes had been executed or not and whether that was him in the grave. And they rolled their eyes at that. None of them ever jumped on my side of that. But what convinced them that we should do it is I told them, hey, this is a cagey little man who's left clues about his past life all over wherever he's been. This is where he might have left something that we could prove he was Jack the Ripper. And let's take a look. This is our chance to get direct evidence instead of just another author giving a theory on television, which we see over and over again.
Yeah, right.
And finally they agreed to do that. So, like I said, my hat's off. And it was a long project. We had some of the greatest archaeologists and anthropologists in the world there. Dr. Janet Munge was the lead anthropologist, and she's just incredible. And, they dedicated a whole episode and a half to it. Mm-hmm. And when we dug it up, as you said, the first grave had an empty coffin in it.
Yes.
An empty coffin. That. You should have seen the reaction, Tina Marie, on that film crew's and the audio crew and the production crew's face, and on Tina and that Amaryllis's and mine. That whoa, that's an empty coffin. What's that doing here? So we were all filming. We were all trying to figure out what to do. The archaeologists are scratching their head, thinking, "Wow, this was all a big con, a big fraud." And Amaryllis jumped in and said, "Let's move over to the second grave he bought and dig down 2 feet deeper than normal." Do you remember that part of the show?
I do.
And then we found the concrete sarcophagus, just like he was an Egyptian pharaoh.
Now he specifically asked for, wasn't it? He had that in his directions that he wanted to be cemented in. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
You know, his life had been digging up graves. All right. He'd made a living doing it. So many on the crew there thought this was his way to escape having someone dig him up. However, Amaryllis and I started thinking, wait a minute. This is his way of hiding the fact that it wasn't him in there in the first place. So it got to be a back and forth. You should have, all the stuff they edited out of the show. I wish they just left mics and cameras on and filmed the whole thing and just let the world see what was going on there at the gravesite. It was like Peyton Place. And I had the archdiocese coming. We were looking down at the sarcophagus, and he was whispering in my ear from the Catholic Church, my son, are you sure it is what evil you release on the world here today,
Wow.
stuff like that. And it was an amazing thing. So the anthropologist started cracking the concrete open. And do you remember when they first showed that skull looking up out of the concrete?
Yes.
That was probably the eeriest moment of my life.
Well, and that's actually something I wanted to ask you about, because I remember that during that time they kind of flashed the camera to you, and you seemed like you were starting to become a little bit overcome with emotion, or at least it seemed so. What was going through your mind at that time, Jeff? You willing to share?
Yeah, well, okay. You think about it. You're 40 years old, 40, you find out that this is your great-great-grandfather, perhaps the most evil man in American history, the Dr. Frankenstein of Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
And we're digging up his grave. We open the concrete up, and Tina Marie, the most horrible smell you've ever had in your life, it hits all of us like a bullet in the chest. All right?
I can imagine.
It was terrible. It was terrible. And here we see a skeleton coming up that has a hat on, that has parts of the mustache, that has the jacket, and has boots still on, but no pants.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're all trying to figure that out. And the scientists are these are anthropologists, they've about had enough too down in the hole.
Yeah.
So the director says, Hey Jeff, you jump down and do some digging, will you? And I said, I'm not going down.
Yeah.
And my co-host, the CIA operative, she's been in Afghanistan, she's been in Iraq, Syria. She says, I'll do it. She jumps down and she starts digging away. And she was tough. And so I'm watching the hole open up, and the skull is there, and the eyes are looking right at me.
Mm.
And I was petrified. I was scared.
Mm.
And we had found a cross on the grave, on the concrete.
Okay.
And a pewter cross, and it said H.H. Holmes, not Herman Webster Mudgett when he'd gone to God, okay? But the alias that he'd committed these murders with. So, and that's what I did for a living back in California in the criminal trial work I did. And all of a sudden, none of this started making sense. Here we had an empty coffin. We had a grave next to it with a concrete sarcophagus. We had a pewter cross with the wrong name on it.
Yeah.
And it started not making sense, and this theory that I'd had for years about it not being him in the grave started looking more and more like it could actually be so.
Yeah. It's just mind-blowing, all of it. Just unbelievable. I do have another question from our chat room for you real quick here, Jeff. What became of the ruby ring Holmes was supposed to always wear? Was it or was it not with the skeleton that you found when you dug up?
No, we didn't find any jewelry. No.
Okay. If he was hung, they probably took all that ahead of time. Wouldn't they have done that?
If something that valuable had been there and he had actually been executed and then carted off to the cemetery, I would imagine that in those times, Tina Marie, unless he had a team of very loyal, assistants, I would imagine something like that wouldn't have made it down into the grave.
It's somebody's pocket, more than likely. So, unfortunately, it does happen. So, you're at the grave site. You guys have exhumed it. It's gone all the way, I believe it was, to London for DNA check to see if this skeleton was actually someone that was related to you. And I know you guys had some pretty unbelievable things that you were able to figure out with the skeleton, like there was believed to be no evidence of a hanging on the skeleton, but that does sometimes happen. But again, there was no evidence showing that this skeleton had gone through a hanging, and the skeleton was a shorter person of height, and also I believe the archaeologist had said more of a stockier build than Holmes had always been.
Yeah. So when they opened up the grave, I needed to go back home. The UPenn took over the remains, took everything back to the University of Pennsylvania, and they did their finite work there, and then they called me back out when the remains had been cleaned off and set up for inspection.
Mm-hmm.
And I, I was back and forth and with the anthropologist the whole time about what they were finding and the photographs they were taking, and they had some amazing photographs of the teeth, gold fillings that he had, things like that. And I was on the flight out. I began. Remember Othello and the Shakespeare and Hamlet holding the skull of his father in his hand, and I had thought about wanting to do that on the flight out. And this might have been a big mistake, which a lot of the forensic scientists are telling me. But so while we were getting prepared for the shoot, because the film crew was there, I snuck down into the laboratory where the skeleton was laid out on the table. And it was polished. It was clean. There was no dirt. It was amazing to look at. And I took the skull in my hand and asked it why he had been so evil when he had such an amazing mind and brain, and he had been able to graduate from the university. He could have been a Louis Pasteur had he wanted to be, and said he was this con, this fraud, this murderer. And of course, while I was doing that, the scientists burst in, and they were yelling and screaming at me for holding it in my hand. And as I put it down, it flopped in my hand, Tina Marie. And I told them, whoa, it moved in my hand. And they said, oh, you're just being ridiculous. Like everything else in your theories, we don't believe anything you tell us. And I said, well, here, it just did it again. So they ran over, and they turned it upside down, Tina Marie, and the human brain was intact in the skull.
So it was moved. It moved. Oh my gosh!
And it had been pickled over all this time.
Well,
in some type of chemical. They still haven't given me an answer to it. And you should have seen them looking at they turned it upside down to where the cervical spine goes into the skull, and you could see the gray matter. It was kind of like a putty, and it was still there. And they were back and forth, doing all their scientist talk. And so we started filming. We got the King's College in London on the line, and they were instructing the scientists what DNA they wanted, because I had given them blood and whatever DNA they needed from me to compare with what we found in the bones. Right. And they had them drill into the back of the skull. Evidently, there's a pocket of bone behind your ear that is a very powdery type bone. And they specifically wanted that. The scientists gave them exactly what they wanted. They packaged it up and flew it off. So so we were left with a comparison of the DNA. We were left with the dental records, the teeth that supposedly had been records that had been done of H.H. Holmes while he was an inmate in the prison, and the remains. We had his skeletal comparison to make. He had been measured by law enforcement and doctors before the execution. And then like you said, on film, during the American Ripper, they actually talked with the scientists about the lack of trauma to the neck. A 6-foot drop through a scaffolding to be jerked to death on a rope. And the scientists admitted that there was absolutely no trauma to the neck. They also admitted that the skeleton was too short, although they had some explanations for the discrepancy. They never came up with a scientific reason for it. They were joking about lifts in the boots or something like that, which the physicians and law enforcement had missed. And when I asked them, the boots are still on him, were there any lifts in the boots? They said no. Yeah. And then, the DNA came back not a match. They gave up on the DNA, as a matter of fact, the scientists did, and stuck with the dental records, which they based their ID of the remains as H.H. Holmes. Well, now I've got an assistant, Vanessa Hogel, who is a dental technician. That's what she does for a living, takes dental casts. And the dental records that the UPenn were using to ID the remains were a photograph of alleged dental casts from H.H. Holmes. And we've now proven that those dental casts were not of Holmes while he was in prison awaiting execution. We know the DNA wasn't a match. We know the skeleton was off, the comparison, and we know there was no trauma to the neck. So we're at a point now where none of the evidence the scientists used at the UPenn to make an ID of the remains works. And at this point, Tina Marie, and with help of shows like yours, I'm trying to get history to agree to take a second look at the evidence, at the remains, to see if we made a mistake IDing that grave as H.H. Holmes.
All right. I'm hoping so, too. This is just an unbelievable, just totally fascinating story, all of it. In fact, I think it's so fascinating that, didn't you get a call from somebody? Aren't you proceeding forward with something?
The movie rights to my book, I've sold the movie rights to my book.
Yes.
And there's the Hollywood group that's interested in making the movie of Bloodstains, and it's great that you asked that, because I was always looking forward to the movie The Devil in the White City.
Uh-huh.
You know, it started off being bought by Tom Cruise, who sold it to Leonardo DiCaprio and Scorsese. Paramount was next up to take a swing at it, and all of them have kind of walked away from it.
Yeah.
It's been 20 years. It's been 20 years now that they've all been talking about making a movie. And from what my friends tell me, Tina Marie, is that the story, while it's a great historical piece about this Dr. Frankenstein in America, it doesn't have that pro and con, the good guy and the bad guy that a movie needs.
Mm-hmm.
And they were worried about that because they knew it was going to be the most expensive movie ever made.
Yeah.
Being Chicago history and all the things. So when this group approached me, they said, we've been watching these guys struggle with that, and we decided to take a look at your book, which has this story about a 40-year-old man who's living his life, and all of a sudden it's turned upside down when he finds out that his ancestor is the most evil man that ever lived.
Yeah.
And how he doesn't want to be the next. And they say, we think that's a great movie. And so they bought the rights to my book, and they're in proceedings now to try to start the production.
That is fantastic. And let me tell you guys that it couldn't happen to a nicer person. Like I said, I've known Jeff for quite a few years. I have always been entertained and just totally fascinated whenever he goes and speaks at one of the Paracons that I've been at. So to have you be able to do or have a movie done about you and your great-great-grandfather and all that happens in Bloodstains, it's just about time. It really should have happened sooner. That's great. I am very, very happy for you. That sounds like a great thing. So let me ask you real quick.
Thank you very much.
If it had come back that the DNA analysis, that it was actually Holmes, did he have any cousins or family members that went missing, or maybe an illegitimate male child that he could have switched out to put into that grave instead of himself that you're aware of?
Not that I know of, but we got the DNA back, Tina Marie, and it doesn't match.
Okay.
And, because I had spent the whole summer realizing with myself that, when this comes back, this DNA matches, you got to move on from this. This is over. This was him. He was executed. Move on. And
right.
when the scientists called me from the UPenn and said, we've given up on the DNA, it's just not working. It's not working. Mm-hmm. We're going to stick with the dental records. And I knew, Tina Marie, we had something, because, DNA is what law enforcement uses, and they use the DNA of Egyptian pharaohs.
Yes.
It's not like 100-year-old grave is too old for DNA.
Exactly.
So
exactly. Yes. Well, Jeff, you have been an unbelievable guest. Will you please come back sometime? Because I still have a list of probably about 15 or 20 more questions, and we are within minutes of being out of time. And I really want to be able to get some more questions answered. And maybe by then you'll be able to give us the date of when this movie's going to come out.
I'd love to do that. And they tell me it's going to be a couple of years, Tina Marie, so we have time to do another show. We have time.
Oh, good. We can do that, most definitely. Yes, if you guys ever get the chance, please go to Xfinity. I don't know if it's on Netflix or any of the other places, but look up The American Ripper. It is just an 8-episode show. It is fantastic. It is going to give you a wealth of information, well worth watching every minute of it. I absolutely loved it. It's where I got a lot of my information. It kind of helped pull a lot of things together for me. So that's a great one. And like I said, if you are a fan of American horror and you've ever seen the 5th season called Hotel, their character and the hotel is loosely based on H.H. Holmes. So that's a great one to always watch. Let's see, guys, if you are looking to get in touch with me, you can find me on Facebook at Illuminating the Paranormal. You can also find me on Facebook at any one of my 3 different companies, Nature's Earthware, W-A-R-E, and there is Heirloom Haberdashery, which is all of my steampunk apparel. And you can also find me at Three Sister Smudging, where we do custom smudges. Jeff, where can they find you?
They can get me on Facebook. I have the Bloodstains on my own personal page. And if you'd like a copy of Bloodstains before it turns into a movie, you can go to bloodstainsthebook.com.
Can they still get an autographed copy from you?
It's a lot of work, but for your listeners, I'll do it, okay? I'll do it.
Oh, there you go, guys. A special right here just for people who listen to Illuminating the Paranormal. Get in touch with Jeff and find out how you can get a signed copy of his book, Bloodstains. And it is a good book, I know, because my niece Kelly has read the book. She got one of the signed copies from Jeff, and I know that she loved it because she's here tonight and she got to ask some great questions. So, guys, it's been so good to hear from all of you and see that you guys are all doing well. Jeff, please stay on the line until we're all done here. I want to be able to talk to you after, and please stay safe, everyone. And I want to hear from everyone again next week. So wash your hands, stay inside. We're all going to get through this, guys. I love you. Have a good night, everyone, and I will talk to you next week. Good evening.